Good evening and a good Erev Shabbos. One disturbing trend, at least disturbing to me, that I want to address tonight, and I find it enlightening from this week's Parsha as well. I find the more we live in today's times, we're frequently faced with binary choices. Are you in favor of this, yes or no? Do you oppose this, yes or no? Are you going to, I'll bring up a few, common, perhaps controversial issues. Are you going to defund the police, yes or no? Are you going to vote for this person? Does it mean you're in support of all this person, yes or no? Do you believe that COVID is a threat? Yes or no? Do you believe we have to reopen the economy? Yes or no? There's increasingly an uncomfortable position that many, if not most people, are finding themselves in. We have to pick, yes or no? Are we trying to be encouraging or discouraging? Yes or no? Whatever it is, there's just no. And the reality with life is, and this is kind of the main point I want to communicate this Erev Shabbos, Parsha Shalach, is that life is a complicated forest. And there are some trees in this forest that are majestic and very positive for the world. They add tremendous ways, and there's some weeds in the forest that need to be uprooted. And there's no society ever, there's no perfect, environment, there's no perfect community, there's no perfect family, there's no perfect person. We're all part of a complex society, we're part of a complex country, we're part of a complex world, and we have to recognize that. One of the stories that comes to mind from the passage of the Talmud, and the prelude to that is that if you read much of the books of Tanakh, of scriptures, we find very disturbing narrative in that. And that is that not only during the times of the end of this first temple, where many of the Jewish people, involved in idol worship, but even the leadership, particularly the political leadership of the monarchy, was not only subservient to idol worship, but in fact promoted that at the expense of Torah Judaism, as crazy as that sounds. And there was one notorious king who was involved not only in idol worship, but promoting idol worship, and his name was Menashe. And Menashe was a notorious king in the sense of how much he pushed the agenda of idolatry in the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel. And in fact, the Mishnah, the sages, talk about Menashe not in a positive light, understandably so, but the Talmud tells us of a story where there was this one Talmudic sage that said at the conclusion of a study session, tomorrow we're going to talk about our good friend Menashe with a sense of mockery. And that evening, the Talmudic sage went to sleep, and Menashe came to him and challenged him with a halachic question. We don't have to get into what the halachic question was, to which the sage did not know the response. So Menashe responded by saying in the dream, Rabbi, so-and-so, you don't know the response to my simple halachic question, and yet you are mocking me. So the sage said, of course I'm mocking you. You were involved in idol worship. The Torah says, Doesn't get more than the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not worship idols. You're worshiping idols. Menashe said, had you lived in my time, had you lived in my generation, you would have thrown your coat off and run to worship idols. How dare you judge me when you did not know the complexities and the challenges of my generation? This is worth remembering today when we rush to judgment. This is just a side point of previous generations. We have to ask ourselves, maybe just a couple questions, but this is not my main point, but a side point, and that is, had we been there, would have we been different? Or perhaps even more disturbing, and that is, in future generations, what are they going to be upset with us about? But I think the general idea of the complexity of life, that we're comprised of complex people, complex societies, complex communities, and a complex global village, and a complex generation, has to be recognized. But sometimes we're just not able to lift our head up and see, sorry to use this cliche, the entire forest. We're just stuck in the weeds, not just literally, but figuratively. And I think this is the lesson of this week's Parsha, the spies. The spies were sent into Moshe, by Moshe on a fact-finding mission, and they go ahead and they come back, and overwhelmingly, the majority of the group gives a very negative and devastating report. They demoralized the people when they said to the people that we will be defeated because the natives of the land are mighty and strong. We stand no chance. Moshe was so demoralized when he saw the people bought into that narrative, that false narrative. But the truth of the matter is, we have to ask ourselves, what the spies had said was not technically false. Because technically there were difficulties in entering the land. There were challenges in the conquest into Israel. The people there were strong, the natives were strong. It was going to go ahead and be difficult. It wasn't going to go ahead and be a walk in the park. Technically, they did not utter a lie. And the question is, if that's the case, then why were the spies so severely punished? And not only were the spies so severely punished that they couldn't enter the land, but that entire generation, or most of the generation, vast majority of that generation, passed away before they had the privilege of entering the land. And the answer, my dear friends, is something that we grapple with as well. And that is, in any society, in this case, the land of Israel, had its warts as well. And just like it has its warts, all situations in life have their ups and downs, their pros and cons. But trying to go ahead and just zero in and focus in on that without looking at the entire picture is something that the spies fell short in. And that's something that we have to be mindful as well when we're given that binary choice, yes or no, in favor or in our opposition. Are you this or are you that? Do you believe in this or do you believe in that? Well, it's a little complicated. It's not just black and white. There's different nuances and shades in between. We have to go ahead and be mindful of that. But when we go ahead and get so locked in to one particular aspect, it doesn't bode well for us. And that, I believe, is the explanation of Rashi, which I believe I heard from a rabbi, I can't remember his name, that Rashi ties in the beginning of the Parsha to the end of the Parsha. The end of the Parsha is the spies. The Torah uses the unusual language of lasur es haaretz, latur et haaretz, to spy on the land. And then in the end of the Parsha, it talks about You shall not be led astray after your heart or after your eyes. And Rashi says the word sasuru or taturu is connected to mitur haaretz. It's also because when somebody sees something that's not appropriate or positive, or somebody goes ahead and is faced with an ideology that's not appropriate or positive, it may look attractive in the moment. It may look delicious at that particular point that you are at. But if you look at the whole picture, of our purpose in life and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to go ahead and bring godliness into the world, how we're supposed to go ahead and bring holiness into the world, all of a sudden it looks a little different because we're looking at it from a much higher vantage point. And I believe that's the explanation of the tzitzis at the end of the parsha. It says that you should wear the tzitzis, and we know that tzitzis, according to the Torah, there should be a thread of tchelas, a thread of blue wool, threads of blue wool. It's not particularly clear if we in our generation know exactly what the tchelas is. Some say we do know in our time, some say we're not exactly sure, but the point is we're supposed to wear tchelas with the blue wool, and the question is why? So the Talmud tells us, because the blue is supposed to remind us of the blue sea. And the blue sea is supposed to remind us of the blue sky. And the blue sky, when we look at the blue sky, is supposed to remind us of the one that created the sky, Almighty God. So it's supposed to, in essence, what the Talmud teaches us, the point of tzitzis is we're supposed to look at the world from up above, a large world, not just a boxed-in narrative that the spies looked at. Oh, just this. Or look at that particular attractive thing without looking at the entire picture. But rather, look at the tzitzis. Look at the tzitzis, or yisemo, so and you look at the tzitzis, was zachartem as kol mitzvos Hashem. You remember the mitzvahs of God. How are we supposed to go ahead and remember the mitzvahs of God just by looking at the tzitzis? And the answer is because the tzitzis is supposed to condition us to look at something, not just in a narrow way, but taking a few steps back and try to understand the complexities of life and the times that we find ourselves in. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living through some extraordinary times, and we're faced with challenges that we were not prepared for, and we did not think we would ever see. Many times we're forced to go ahead and choose. Yes, no. We're put in these positions of we have to execute binary responses to binary questions. Well, let's remember the lesson of the spies. There's no perfect situation in life. There's no perfect society, there's no perfect land, there's no perfect family, there's no perfect person. It's complex. It's all about how we form our narrative, the realities that we see. May we be encouraged by the parsha, by the end of the parsha, from the mitzvah of tzitzis. Let us know, give us the courage of how to always look at situations appropriately and with wisdom. Wish you all a very warm Shabbos.